Hey guys, welcome back to another live stream with the Rookies. Thanks for tuning in on a Monday. I hope you're all having a wonderful and very safe day. So I decided to kick off just a little earlier today. We're going to review some of the work that's on the Rookies website, along with an additional post from Discord. So to get started, we have Unreal Engine waterfront splash damage from Goregram. It's an art test, it seems. So, I mean, I assume looking at this, it's either Marmoset or Unreal. I suppose it'd just be a good idea to give some feedback in this guy. So to start, one thing that kind of stands out to me is just kind of the scaling overall of everything. I just kind of feel like when I look at this, the crates are just a little too big, barrels are a little too big, and then like I'd probably bring this down by 20% as well. Probably decrease this by, scale this down by 80%, so it's just a little smaller, so they kind of just fit proportional to everything else that's going on. Because I mean, when you look at the bridge point, you have like the bridge and then the crate, but the crates, like compared to it, look pretty huge. You know, and you would think that a cartridge model would be about from like here to here. So yeah, and then we got the barrels as well. I think one really cool idea for this would be for variation would be like simply just maybe having like a bunch of blue ones and then maybe like a red or a yellow one, just to kind of break the scene up a wee bit. And you know, the crates here as well, I'd probably shoot for just kind of like some variation details around these. You know, maybe you could have like one crate open, you know, a few closed, and maybe like there's like contents visible inside the crate with the lid on the side, like leaning against it. And then I feel like this ground section is quite noisy, so if I was to like approach this, I'd probably really pull back on all this roughness detail, because if you were like to zoom out from this or look at it from a distance, it would just be very noisy on screen. I'd probably, you know, it would be really cool to maybe add some like painted variations of this guy, like congregated metal. You know, probably I'd probably even go as far as scaling this down and just adding more, because it just feels very big, you know, when you look like compared to the size of the bridge. And yeah, I mean, the tires are really cool. You can see this floating on water. That all makes sense. If we look at the top section here, you know, we can see that there's a bunch of details that stand out, that kind of what I would read right away and kind of be like, oh, I would change these, which would be the graffiti. I feel like the placement of it is just a little off. I don't know why there'd be graffiti on like the window sections. I think it looks pretty cool, but I'd probably, if I was you, I'd probably like scale this down, kind of put it on the top left section. You know, maybe this guy, put him underneath both of these windows. Again, I'd probably scale these tires down a wee bit because if you think about it, you have a road, and if you think about like the scale of a car and a vehicle, it's going to like take up both sides. So like these tires are just reading quite large. I'd probably bring these down by like 70 or 60%. You know, same as the barrel. You know, maybe you could stack these guys up against the wall. It would give you more kind of because I feel sometimes a good idea is like if you can stack these guys up on the sidewalk, it gives you an opportunity to kind of set dress on the road area. You know, when I look at like this guy here, it's very big. You know, it's a lot bigger. Like the manhole section is a lot bigger than it would be in real life. So I'd probably scale this down by 50%, 60%. You know, and just bring it right down. And another cool idea would be like if you were going to add like a decal idea on top of this, would be like scale this down 60% and then place an additional concrete decal on top. So you have kind of like that separation between the um, road tarmac and then like the cement on the sidewalk. And then like another detail would kind of, you know, you kind of have it going on here where you can see like, you know, the concrete between the sidewalk concrete and like this gutter lid. You know, I'd probably go for something like this around this guy here, just to get a bit more variation. And then you got this massive crack, which I'm feeling like is a bit too big, so I'd probably scale this down, you know, decrease the opacity slightly and just bring the color down so it kind of blends in better. Yeah, for like this guy here, I'd probably just, you know, it'd be really cool to maybe like do a pass in this where there's like visible dirt and, you know, like alpha wear and tear around it. So you kind of get like that kind of tear on the edges and just general aging and of this guy. And probably, you know, the size of these pipes, you know, you consider the size of the door and then you consider the size of like the barrel and wheels. You can see that things are very unproportional. And this like wall detail is really cool, but I just feel like it's quite noisy. So what I would do is probably pull back quite a bit and just, you know, place the additional detail in areas that make sense. So, you know, you got like this nice staining along the top. I'd probably pull back on like a lot of the wear and tear in the center and the concrete, and I'd probably just place it around the bottom and edges. So it allows like the brick material in the center to breathe more. So as you can see here, there's just another shot of it. Yeah, that's probably what I would do. I mean, again, just bring this guy down. You know, you could even go as far as just adding a bit more wear and tear to the yellow decal on the road as well. Maybe it's just some like tire tracks as well, which would be pretty cool. But yeah, otherwise, it's looking good. It's on the right track. Cool. Let's see what else we got here. I wonder if there's even a. No, it doesn't. Okay. Next up, we got this you know, post-apocalyptic subway column, which looks pretty cool. I really like the high poly model on it. I thought it was like super detailed, and you can see a lot of really nice variation on the tiling parts. You know, and you got all like the metal support beams and stuff come through, which looks really cool. It reminds me of like stuff from like Gears of War. You know, I can see that it's like David. You know, so I kind of get that sort of quality bar vibe. But yeah, this is looking really solid. You know, you can see here you got this wireframe. The only thing I would kind of say is when it comes to this kind of asset, I feel like the wireframe is quite dense. It's like a lot of these little like tileable guys, I'd probably not have as geometry unless you wanted to have like some visible chunks missing, or it's like the plastering behind it or the concrete behind is visible and there's just a massive gap where all the tiles have come off. Otherwise, I would probably just keep this as simple geometry and bake it all down as a texture. You kind of see you've kind of got that idea down here where you have those visible gaps and they look really good. Your topology is really nice. You know, for this guy up here, you could either keep it as geometry or you could literally just like create a bunch of these guys and bake them down on like an alpha card with an or like a card with an alpha, and then just like place that alpha place those cards around the top section so it kind of replicates this detail, but you're not paying for as much in terms of geometry. Of course, depending on the project and the optimization needs of it. Again, I think it's really cool here that you got like the piping section. Like yeah, the wireframe looks pretty good. Doesn't look too dense. That looks pretty reasonable. And I think what would be really cool on these like little guys here is I can see that because this is all geometry, I would assume that each of these guys they're either tiling UVs or the guy who made this has basically went and just kind of UV'd all of these uniquely or just kind of mirrored them all on top of like each other in the UVs. But I would say for this is probably again best to just bake it all down, have it a part of your wall with your UVs laid out, which allows you then to go in and actually add more details without having to worry about taking up any more UV space. Because as you know, when it comes to making assets, it's so important to get like the resolution through them. You can see down here, he's applied, this almost kind of looks like the metal edge generator in Substance. So one thing I always do, like when it comes to assets, if I use any generators, I usually kind of then go ahead and apply an additional pass and like add like a painting layer, and then just go in and just kind of add on top of it and paint extra detail in, so it doesn't look just like it's kind of like a stamp generator. I'll probably go again for like this guy here. I think it's really cool. You have like this nice brass, but I'd probably go decrease the roughness a bit so it's just a bit more shiny, and then kind of just use your dirt to kind of really define the roughness in the areas where it makes contact with like these sections that kind of bolt it to the column itself. Probably the same here as well. Yeah, I mean, otherwise it's definitely on the right track. I think just it could do with just a little bit more love in terms of just the material definition. And you can even go as far as just a little, slight hue changes or some just slight discoloration, as you already have here in the tiles, which is really nice. But yeah, this looks really cool. I like here that you have a shot that like the camera's kind of hitting it, so you get to see kind of just how everything's reflecting off it. I think when it comes to like, because you can assume that maybe like this side here could be the same as like what you see on the left here could be the same on the right, and what you can see in the back could be the same in front. You could probably go ahead as even mirroring UVs for this guy, and then just cutting into the geometry and adding like these sections, unless you're like pulling from the sculpt itself. So I mean, you can see here in the sculpt you have all those details in, which is really cool as well. Don't get me wrong, that's really good. So this is a much better shot of wireframe. So again, if I was to approach this, I would just like all these little pieces here, I'd just break down as a flat texture, unless you purposely want sections missing. But overall, the topology is really nice in this guy. I'd probably, pull back and just use guys a bit more if we could. But yeah, this is really cool. Next, we have this here. I was checking out. It's a Viking axe, Bahula axe in Unreal, by Gene. Really nice detail. The material looks really, really well done on this guy. But one thing that kind of stands out to me is I feel like there's a lot of noise. In terms of, I feel like if this axe was used in battle, there would be any dents or dings on it would be intentional. So instead of having like a lot of these random scratches, it would be more towards the edge, and that would kind of carry around. And if I was to do this, I would probably pull back and all like these slight scratches and details, and just kind of place the damage, purposefully place the damage in areas that make sense. So as you have here on like the edges where it's going to make contact, maybe you can have some of the slight scratches here alongside it. This looks really cool because it kind of looks like the metal's kind of chipped away as well, and it's just like, there's no like the corroded metal on top. And I think this part here reads really nice. And so does this. You can see like there's a lot of really subtle details in between in the center, which is really nice. Like you can see that they really did some work and just kind of pushing that detail through. And the way that you have all the details around the bolts as well looks really, really good. I probably go as far as maybe adding some dings to these guys, where it's just like, um, maybe this is mid contact like this, so you have just like subtle little dings and knocks around these. Yeah, and I wonder when I look at this, like, has the person UVDs kind of mirrored them over, or is it just like both unique? I mean, you could probably get away with mirroring, so you could just it saves you time texturing this guy, but B, it just whatever details you add here, it'll just reflect on this side, which I can see here. Because you have like these unique details, you could probably actually mirror this part, flip it around, and then paint this on the other side. So you're only paying basically for like one UV for this guy that's just mirrored, but then when you flip it over, he's not going to see, these details on this side, but maybe this detail is actually on the other side to the player's point of view. One thing that stood out to me at this is the tries count, like 30k triangles. I feel like that is just a little too heavy for the asset. And if I was to approach this, I'd probably like for the strap sections down here, you can see there's like edge loops to the side and then the center. I'd probably remove those because really all you need if you really want to push this through in geometry is just basic shapes and use letting your normal map do all of the additional work there. But I mean, you can go ahead as far as you could also approach just baking this down as a texture instead. Same down here and really pull back on the detail. Especially the cylinder side, the amount of size in these sections here. Because when you think about it, like the player's never going to get close enough to literally be for this to be right in front of the screen. So there's a lot of wasted geometry where you could get away with either A, baking this down on a card with an alpha, or B, if you want it as geometry, just really pull back where you get the shape, but outside the shape, you're basically letting the normal map do all that work for you. And then up here as well, I think it's cool that you have this as geometry. It definitely adds to it. But if it was me, I would probably just bake it down and just push the material work so you can kind of get that like separation where you can kind of like fake it being sitting in front of it, so you could darken the background, maybe highlight these, darken the center of them, so it just gives you that kind of like just depth in the materials. And you can see here as well, there's just a lot of additional edge loops here that probably aren't needed. So I'd probably like all these center edge loops, I would just strip out and see them here as well. Because at the end of the day, they don't affect the silhouette. The silhouette would stay even if you remove those, and you're saving yourself trace count. And then up here as well, I'd really pull back in these guys. Especially around here, there just seems to be a lot of unnecessary edge loops. And so far, from looking at students' work, it all looks really good. But the area of weakness that I can see is when it comes to the topology. It's always, and I mean, I made this mistake too when I started. I used to add additional edge loops and then wonder why I needed to optimize it. But it's basically the rule of thumb is if it doesn't affect the silhouette or shape, you don't need those additional geometry or edge loops or vertices. So you could really pull back, as long as you're keeping this guy as so like circular, then it just means that when you bake your high poly off it, you're not going to get any weird artifacting or like black edges. As if you were to if this was like super smooth in your high poly, but it wasn't, the same roundness on your low poly, you would end up with artifacting. And you can see here in the UVs as well. I'm just trying to distinguish which is which here. So it looks like, okay, it looks like this guy is the center point here. And we could assume that this here is the outside section of the axe here, like the blades. So this asset wouldn't need 3 texture sets, especially at 4K. You're essentially paying for a total of 12K, which is it's pretty expensive. It's probably about 40 megs per 4K texture set. So 160 megs in texture memory. So what you could do for this is you could have it in a single 0 to 1 space at 4K. And to do that, the rule of thumb is if there's multiple parts of this that are replicating around the mesh, only unwrap one and bake one. And either A, explode the mesh, so you have like this guy off to the side, you bake all that detail down, you bring him back over and you just duplicate the mesh and place it around. For example, these spikes, they would be appearing here, but instead of them taking up multiple UV islands, you'd only be unwrapping one and just mirroring the rest by basically instancing it around the mesh. This here, you could probably just bake this down and avoid having to actually unwrap all this, so therefore you'd even save more space. If you do the same here, if you basically delete all this and just bake it down on the axe, you basically save all this space here that you're using for this. I mean, you could either A, do that, or B, delete one side of it, unwrap the other side, mirror it over. So like you have the front and the other side mirrored, and then just duplicate this over, and therefore you save yourself way more UV space. When it comes to, for example, these sides here, you also have to remember the player's never going to see both sides at once. So the best thing you can do is basically just mirror half of it and bake it down, and just try and avoid any butterfly artifacting on the points of the mirroring. But because you have like these spike sections in front of it, it probably will cover a lot of that detail anyway, and the player won't notice that. So effectively for this whole mesh, you could basically just like cut it in half and just mirror the front with the back, and then symmetrically flip it over and just attach it and weld before you bake. And that's one thing to remember, always weld before you bake, otherwise you'll end up with visible seams. And always make sure your UVs are 1-to-1 with your smoothing groups as well on your mesh. But it's definitely on the right track. And you can see here that there's a lot of really nice detail in ZBrush, which looks really good. I really like it. I like all of these little sort of dings and knocks are really cool. I feel like if you had probably avoided just adding those extra details in the material pass, it would read a lot cleaner and a lot nicer. I'd probably again just bake all this, because you can see it's so close to the surface that there's probably no point keeping this geometry, so I would have just baked all this down onto the actual blade itself and then just let the materials kind of do the depth and work in that. As we can see here, it's just very much geometry when it can just literally be a flat texture with these guys in it, and you're just basically texturing it in such a way that gives you that depth. But overall, this is definitely on the right track. It's looking really good. I mean, again, when I see the stuff the rookies are pumping out, it just gets better and better. And I'm very excited to see what's ahead. And another thing I came across with rookies, and I thought this was very impressive for someone at that level. And I thought, like, looking at this, like, it's done such a wonderful job. Like, it's just super detailed. It looks really nice. Although a bunch of things do stand out to me when I look at this. The first thing is, I feel like the kind of color and tone of the building is it's just wood and wood and wood, and it's just very much kind of the same color palette. And I feel like it just reads almost quite flat and quite noisy. So what I would probably do if I was working on this guy, I would probably try and just add a bit more material definition and change to, especially the wooden planks at the front. Kind of just add some coloration. Maybe you could go in and just add detail around like the sides and bottom. Just like the wood pieces on the sides, just kind of just make it push in certain sections and like a gradient. Maybe darken some of the planks on the front, darken around the door as well. Always remember that the gradient should always follow the right direction as well. You can see that the guy's done that here, which is really nice. But just this top section here, it just looks slightly distorted. Overall, it's looking really good, and it's definitely on the right track. You know, especially for the tiles here on the top, I feel like these, because they're the same color as the front and sides, they also kind of read as wood. You know, I'd probably darken these, you know, give it like a darker tiling, you know, maybe just add some of the sand and dust up around it. I feel like the side sections are reading really nice as well. And you got this nice cloth hanging down, which looks really cool. And overall, yeah, I mean, the composition's really nice. Like, you know, you got the nice skybox in the background, but you got like the windmill thing, and you got like some of the rocks and stuff, which looks really cool. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely on the right track. It's looking good. Um, and I like that you do have these holes and gaps as well. It kind of gives you like a bit of a look inside into the interior of the house as well. Um, yeah, it's looking really, really cool. And you got like sort of like the wooden knots as well, which look really nice. I'd probably go like add a bit more detail to this guy here and kind of just, you know, I wonder if there's any closer shots of it. No. So I think it's good here. You can see that the person who made this has used basically like an alpha to basically add a lot of these like wear and tear around the fabric that's hanging on the top, which is a really smart way to do it. Like when you're doing this stuff, never do it in geometry because it will cost too much. You know, you can kind of assume that this is just a very much simplistic geometry that's just sitting on top of here, and then alpha is doing a lot of the work with hiding all of that and adding the extra additional wear and tear. But yeah, like this is definitely one of the things that stand out to me, and one of the ones I've seen that look really, really good. I'd probably watch just for your resolution as texture resolution as well. If it's, you know, it depends kind of if you're taking like really high render screenshots of this guy, it can read quite noisy, or if you're using low resolution textures, it can come across quite noisy as well. So just whenever everything's kind of balanced out, it just reads a lot better. But yeah, really good work. Like this looks really cool so far. And then I've seen this little guy as well, which I thought was really cute. So it's Machinarium Fan Art. So I think it's really cool, this person, because one thing I always kind of ham on when I check out portfolio art is just making sure that, like, you know, to try and not add like super amounts of dirt, but just enough around kind of objects that are attached to like another object to kind of marry it together so it doesn't feel like it's just sort of like floating or sitting in front of it. So you can see this guy has kind of took that approach by just adding dirt around the eyes to kind of just make it feel like it's merged with the head section. You know, you can see it's done the same with the bolts, which is really nice. And I probably would pull back on this a little bit, wouldn't have it as, you know, dense and just kind of more subtle. You know, same in here, I'd probably just darken this, I wouldn't have it as brown. And probably pull back up here, like this rust. I can see here that you got like kind of like a, I don't know if it's maybe like a shadow from the light or if it's just like a smoothing group issue, but there's like a shading error happening here. I think one thing would be cool is because you have so much surface detail on this, it will give you so much opportunity to go in and actually like add hue color change and desaturation to parts of the paint, and maybe even just like sections of it where the paint's actually being chipped away and there's just another color revealing underneath it. Like there's just so much opportunity to go in and just really kind of add your own spin to it, especially around this guy here. You know, you'd have so much opportunity to go in and just add, you know, maybe like the middle section, like the platform could be a different material or color. You know, maybe you can add some just kind of color change along the top, you know, along the sides. I just feel when you have an object like this, it just gives you a lot of room to play with material work. You know, you can see here as well, like, I think what's really cool is he has a lot of like micro detail, like rust detail and dirt, which is really nice. But I can see here, this is very much like a stylized or like a wood alpha for a dent. I'd probably avoid that, you know. I'd probably go for more like just bring it into ZBrush and kind of just like add little like dings and knocks rather than like these like sharp kind of cuts. You know, on top here, you could go in and you could probably just add some additional edge wear around the top section here. You know, maybe on top of the bolts as well. You could like just have edge wear around the sides of them. just so it gives it more variation, here as well, around the sides. Like anywhere, maybe this guy's trip and fell and there's contact on his eyes on the ground, you just kind of get some of that general wear and tear, which would be really cool. Topology is really nice on this guy as well. I'd probably bring the top of these spheres down on Topology. I'd keep the shape, but just optimize the top section, because your normal map would do a lot of that work. Probably strip out the edge loops in the center of this guy, because at the end of the day, you have to remember, if it's not affecting the silhouette or shape, it doesn't need to be there. Yeah, probably here as well. Unless this guy's animating, I'd strip it out here as well, in the torso area. And same with the legs. If it's animating, the more topology you have, the more edge loops, the better it is for deformation. But if it's just a static mesh, I'd go in and just remove these. And same with the arms. And then this guy here, you could just go in and just strip these edge loops in the center, because again, this doesn't really affect the silhouette. But overall, yeah, this looks really cool. I mean, it clearly shows that A, this person knows how to do their topology really well, and B, set their UVs up really well, and C, have a good start at the texturing pass. So that's really cool. And then the next one I seen was the Spell Shotgun by Gene. I feel like one thing that stands out to me with these portfolio pieces is I feel like there's very much a large bloom happening, and I feel like that can really pull away from the material definition and the detail on it. Especially when you use a bloom and like a blurred background in marmoset, it just kind of hides a lot of like the subtle details that would probably come through if it was just a light against the actual object, the mesh itself. I think this is definitely on the right track. Although when I do look at the topology, I can see that there's a lot of things that could be optimized. For example, all these edge loops in the center of the barrel, I would just remove these. I would keep these extruded parts, but I just get rid of all these, as they're not making any difference whatsoever to the geometry or the silhouette shape. You could probably optimize this guy more. So for example, you'd have a cylinder with no additional edge loops in the center point, and then you could just Boolean cut the cylinder in it, and then just weld that or connect the vertices of this to the corners of the square, so you don't have to worry about paying for all these extra polygons in the center of it. And then probably down here as well, I just do the same, remove all these edge loops in the center, in the interior as well. Because you have to remember, when this goes into a game, there's going to be a lot of additional edge loops that's going to be calculated, and it's going to be a lot more expensive for your GPU to render this. And all these additional edge loops that you have could pay or be enough for another asset or two or even three assets on screen. So for example, you could basically optimize this section up here, and that would probably give you enough additional topology or like budget to like, I don't know, put like a barrel or a crate in front of you. So it's always important to remember that when you're doing this stuff. It's just like, if I add these, if I add these edge loops, does it affect the geometry or silhouette? No. Well, then I leave them out. And for like this whole section up here, you could probably get away with either A, optimizing this further and keeping it as geometry, or just using alpha with a baked normal map and just let the alpha do the work up here, revealing these holes, but you're not actually paying an additional geometry cost for it. Again, you can see here in the handle, I would definitely go in and optimize this much, much more. And these like grip sections, you could bake that probably down in your normal map, and you wouldn't have to worry about it being geometry. Just keep it all simple. At the end of the day, as long as it's not affecting the actual you're maintaining the shape and silhouette, then you can get rid of as much of the additional geometry and edge loops as you need. And then up here as well, I just repeat the same process, because it very much feels like this is like almost like a sub-D mesh. So this would even go as far as to be like your high poly. And I feel like up here, if this is like general decay and aging of it, I feel like there's just a lot going on. I'd probably really pull back in that and just kind of have it around the edges, instead of it being in the center here, just use some dirt and kind of just displace it around the edges. One thing I always say is, well, when you're doing your high poly, don't be afraid to inflate your edges slightly so they're not as sharp. So when you do your high poly, it allows you two things: A, you get softer edges in your norm map pick, and B, you don't have to worry about adding chamfers to your topology to compensate for that. You can keep this as just a basic, boxy shape, but your normal map will make it look like it has smooth edges. But overall, it's definitely on the right track. Like, these things are starting to look really good. Again, just watch your topology. Next, we have the Unreal 4 scene from Ozen New. It's the New Republic prison ship, Unreal Engine 5. Wow, nice, using UE5 for this. So I think one thing that stands out to me when I first look at this is, I think it's like you have a lot of really nice shapes going on, and there's enough edge loops on like these, sections here where you're not getting any visible faceting. And I can see here, you can see like in the center point and down here that it's almost like this person's used the mid-poly workflow in this, where you've added those additional geometry edge loops and chamfers to really kind of get that smooth edge going, which looks really cool. And you can see that this scene is very symmetrical. So really and truly, you'd only have to really work in one half and then just like flip it over. But I feel like what this does is, or that kind of solution does, is it allows you to quickly produce a scene, but then you lose a lot of opportunity too for unique details. So I feel like what this scene could do with is just another pass of adding details, where you could go in and create an atlas texture of just like screws and bolts, bake that down with a normal and alpha channel, bring it into Unreal, set it up, and then in 3ds Max or any other package you use, place cards around these sections and unwrap to that atlas texture. So when you apply it, it looks like there's visible normal detail in of like screws and bolts and piping, and you're not having to worry about actually doing it from like a high poly mesh. I mean, many games use this approach, and especially in the two last Doom games, they lean heavily on that workflow where it's all mid poly and use atlas textures to really kind of pump through on a lot of the micro details. And you could probably go as far as, even if this was like just a tileable material, you could go as far as setting a material up in Unreal that allows edge wear, depending on where the curvature of the mesh happens. Or you could literally just take this into Substance Painter and do a pass where you basically create a mask. So you basically paint areas where you want that detail to appear, and then you could set it up on Unreal and tell it, hey, wherever is basically like white in a mask, I want there to be edge wear. So just another really quick way of doing it without having to pay for additional cost. And this is really cool. I can see here that this person's basically used like a trim sheet for this, where it has like all these little details, and there's probably a trim sheet that goes like horizontally, and you just unwrap the front of this to that. And the same here as well for this part. They're probably sharing the same trim sheet, and it's probably just a different material with a darker color applied. But overall, yeah, this is looking really, really nice. Again, I feel like this grind section is very, like the walls and grind, they're very clean, and I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for you to go in and really just add additional details. So you could create an atlas texture of like panels and stuff that can be placed on the floor, and then you basically just add alpha cards to this, where you maybe have sections along here, and then you have that unwrapped to the alpha panel, where it shows additional detail, like a walkway with maybe some like, kind of like on the sides there's like visible vents and such. Especially on the walls as well, you got all the panels appearing. You could have maybe like, you have this mesh here that you maybe have like duplicated around this, but then you have another variant where maybe there's like a visible hole in it with piping and wiring, and maybe there's another variant that has like a panel that can actually come off, and then under that it has additional things in it. It just allows you to quickly add a lot of variation to your scene. And I think for the lights, I'd probably, because I can see they're very bright, so depending on what missive texture you're using, I'd probably add like a gradient in Photoshop to the missive, so you kind of get like that kind of dark glowy edge, and it just kind of helps your missive lighting just to pop a bit more. I think this is really cool, a little cute asset. Oh, I can see there's a lot of like the general edgeware generator and Substance. So I'd really like, I mean, I'm all for it, but I think what's important is to add an additional paint layer on top and just kind of add a lot of unique details where, it's not just generated. Like maybe there's additional, wear and tear down here, some around here, some coloration to the center points. So it's not just like a dark gray, it's like maybe a little whiter. Maybe there's just a little hue change in the color. It just adds much more interest. But yeah, overall, it's definitely on the right track. And this is really cool here. You can see that the materials you created in Substance are in render, which is really cool. And then the modular kits you created. So for this, for example, you could have like created maybe a few more variants of these guys where there's like broken sections of it with wiring visible, and maybe panels at the bottom part of these parts. Maybe this wall section could have been like 2 more times, and then like a panel in the center, or just maybe some just like wall damage. You could also add some like maybe there's like because you have these guys here for like the visible door areas. So maybe in the wall you could add like a window, but then maybe if you don't want anything on the other side, you just kind of like frost it up and dirt it up so it doesn't look like it's player can see through it. And the one thing I always think when you're creating modular architecture like this, always remember to make sure that your edges are really round and smooth and there's no visible faceting happening. And the best way to do that is just to use the chamfer modifier in 3ds Max or the modeling package that you use. But overall, it's definitely on the right track. I feel like with another pass in this, just adding additional detail, maybe some storytelling elements, it would be definitely a solid portfolio scene. And then I've seen a bunch of materials here from Ozan. I remember reviewing his props on another stream. And his material looks really nice, but I feel like the one thing that stands out to me is I feel like his camera is zoomed in it's very close to the material. So it's very hard to read kind of what's going on up here and around here. Is this like a sand, like a concrete? Same here. It's hard to kind of make out kind of what this represents. I'd say if you're doing portfolio stuff, one cool idea would be like to have like a little image in the corner of just like the material that you're trying to replicate in the real world. So if it's like concrete, then so it's like oh, here's my Substance versus like the real life replica of it. I mean, you can see this is concrete. You have a lot of really nice kind of cracks and details and wear, which looks really cool. But yeah, just a thought on that. And then this is really cool here that you have like all these variants. So I mean, from here you can clearly see that it's all concrete. So I'd probably just work on the presentation a little bit more, but otherwise, like the material work is looking really great. And then lastly, we have 2D concept art by a girl called Samantha who posted on the Discord channel. So primarily being a 3D artist, I'll probably look at this stuff more of like a 3D kind of, like if I was to use this to build out objects in 3D space. So I think this is pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of readability on it. You can kind of see what's going on the sides and the top, and you can see the shapes. Like there's a lot of really nice definition. You can see the background is basically a planet, which looks cool. And then down here, you can see the silhouette of the ships. I'd probably, if I was to like look at this as a 3D artist, I'd probably want more callouts on this. So, for example, if you had like these few, or like this guy, maybe just have it like inflated up, so it's like a higher detail version, and then there's like kind of like smaller boxes kind of pointing to parts of it, like, oh, this is how this looks, and this is how that looks, and this is what this represents. Because in 3D you could create this, but it's hard to kind of understand what's going on. It's hard to know kind of like what does this area represent. Like there's blue glow under, but why? What is the purpose of that? Is it just like a kind of like an accent color of the ship when it's flying? Is it like, you know, energy coming from it when it's, you know, propulsing, and just a lot of that kind of stuff I just keep in mind. I thought this was really cool. I seen this and I thought, wow, that's really, really nice. I mean, it's cool because you got like this little guy who's like in a little hazmat suit thing. He's opening like a container. And yeah, that's really cool. I'd probably do a few call outs on this. Like, I'd probably just like kind of like pick a section here and kind of just blow it up a wee bit and just be like, okay, this is kind of what's going on here. You know, just kind of showcase the story and narrative. Like, there's a lot of story in this already. You can kind of get an idea of what's going on, but I just think a lot of those little things would be really cool to see. And so you've got some seamless materials here, which are really, really nice. And some here in Blender as well. Cool. Tile textures for Blender. Really nice stylization to it. You can see that there's visible sculpts done and then just a really lot of stylized kind of texture work on top. And return. Wow, so you built it out on Unreal and then you paint over it. Nice. Okay, well, that wraps up today's stream. And thanks for checking in, everyone. Appreciate your time. And again, if you have anything that you would like for me to review in the next live stream, which is on Friday, feel free to drop it in the Discord channel under game development, and I will take a look and review it. Okay, have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and thanks for tuning in.